Ongama, welcome back once again. When we got cut off, I was asking about your thoughts in relation to the invitation to former President Jacob Zuma to appear at the commission. Is it necessary for him to come through?
For the nation, it's very much necessary. He rubbished the claims that were made by both former Deputy Finance Minister Mcebisi Jonas as well as Faiki Mentor. So it will be good for him to come as far as the public interest is concerned. But for him personally, he might perhaps maybe choose legal representation. I'm not sure.
Do you think the Commission will help to restore good governance in state-owned enterprises?
To the extent that the Commission sifts through the evidence that's before it and is able to pronounce on who are the likely guilty parties. I don't know if they can make guilty verdicts, but they can certainly provide some direction in terms of who has liability, who does not. If it does that, it will send a very strong message to politicians that notwithstanding the power you may have at a certain time in history, there's going to come a time when you no longer hold that power and you should be held accountable. By the way, Des, in line with this, it's not the first time the South African government is accused of large-scale corruption. And the point I was making earlier on is that the disadvantage with pursuing individualized cases is that sometimes you can be perceived to be political in your approach, choosing to pursue certain cases and ignoring others, even though that decision may be purely about legal feasibility. But there's a case to be made based on Henny van Vuren's revelations of over 500 billion spent illegally between 1974 and 1994. The people that made those requests that we are being selective as South Africans in being pedantic about wanting the current administration to account when in fact they are, according to Henny's revelations, lots of cases that can be investigated and successfully resolved even in this time. So it's important for us as a country first to deal with this one because it's more immediate, but the story of corporate corruption colluding with government does need to be looked at, even going as far back as evidence allows commissions or illegal institutions.
So in regard to that concern you're raising about what you call large-scale corruption, colluding between government and corporate, where does civic society fit in terms of holding government and corporate to account?
So generally, there would be politicians that are linked to whatever systems of extracting money from the public fiscus. Those either would be the president, as it is alleged in this case, or provincial or local politicians. The importance on the part of citizens is that, one, some people may have a role where they have evidence of things which they need to bring forward, and we need to be courageous as a country in doing that. But also, some of us may be just observers or they are negatively affected. And I think this was done during the Zuma Must Fall protests, where citizens are lobbied to kind of express their disapproval of what's happening. So those kinds of opportunities to engage and express public disapproval must be exploited. But we also need to ask ourselves as a society, it is impossible to produce a government that is accountable when you have at a broad society level a society that is prone to wanting to find means outside of waiting in queues, outside of waiting for processes to unfold, but wants to cut corners. Corruption is rampant in South Africa. It's not politicians that bribe traffic officers. It's not politicians that bribe other, institutions. So we do need, as a society, to confront the propensity to resort to cutting corners when it comes to advancing ourselves.
So, Ongama, some of the main characters going into the commission are your fakey mentor, who has come out to say she was offered a position, your SABC Jonas, the former Deputy Minister of Finance, and your Themba Maseko, who used to be with the government communications machinery, who have come out openly to say we have definitely been offered things inappropriately. How credible, how watertight are their stories, and what other characters can we see coming up?
First of all, those individuals were very courageous at a time when it was probably very risky for themselves to have done so. Came out and accused and revealed and alleged that the president had been directly involved in state capture. And remember, during this time, the president's defense was that he has no business whatsoever if people are using his name in this way, and and his son was very much at liberty to do business the way that he wanted. So their revelations were very important in understanding what role the president could have played directly. Secondly, it's going to be important now how the commission handles it, because they came up with alternative ways in which we could understand events that were unfolding. Let's take Nenegate, for example. The story that we were told there was that he was being prepared to take over the BRICS Bank, but when the revelations and that didn't happen. So when the revelations from Mr. Jonas came, they helped bring to the public domain a more plausible story as things looked at the time. So we'll see how and now that survives under cross-examination.
Ongama, thank you for those initial thoughts. I'm sure we'll continue to talk to you throughout the process. Ongama Mtimka is a political analyst, but also with the Nelson Mandela University.